Hello, Deus Ex Machina here, the man who will turn a hopeless situation into a happy ending. All of you are very, very rotten and very silly. You all are jealous. You have envy. You have Schadenfreude. What does the word Schadenfreude mean? It means derivation of pleasure from other people's suffering. The human condition is impure. It's a bunch of people plotting and scheming against each other, in many ways, in very evil ways. People don't necessarily want to see people happy or succeeding, and people are jealous. People will evilly plot against someone who is a rival to lead to their downfall. The game of chess is a very interesting game. It is basically a game in which you have a bunch of pieces. Each piece is constrained to move in certain ways on a board. Now, the greatest players, like Magnus Carlsen, can think up to eight moves ahead. For a given board state in chess, there exists an optimal move, a move that is the most optimal to make, given the board state. All right? And so, in a certain board state, there also can be only one possible move, and that is especially the case if one person is winning and has forced the opponent into a corner. Now, in this world of business, life, relationships, money, and law, it is very much so a game of chess. And so what I've learned about this world is that none of it is goddamn pure. If you are to be strong, if you are to stand up for yourself, and if you are to demand out of life what you deserve, you must not be a pushover. You cannot be too pure, because if you're too pure, the world will eat you up like a wimp. The world is not pure. And so you can watch the animated series, The Avatar with Aang. All right? Now, Aang is a natural airbender, light, free. And so his opposite element is earth, of course. And so when Aang is trying to learn earth, Toph really treats Aang like an absolute bitch. He's light, he's free, he's fast, but he's not strong and heavy and powerful like earth. And so Toph gives Aang a really good beating when she's trying to whip some sense into Aang in terms of earth bending, for him to not be a light bitch, to get some earth to him, some mass to him, some power and strength and stability to him in the earth element. And so, in many ways, my naivety has been that I've been pure. Now, frankly, the world with a bunch of its brains is a bunch of brains who ultimately are jealous of other people. And so a bunch of brains want other people to be normal. All right? Normal. Now, in my speech on sexuality, I touched on my sexual attributes. My sexual attributes are not normal. I am actually moderately endowed. All right? And so that speech blew up to, nearly 7,000 views now. Only likes, over 20 likes. Very brilliant speech. I had no idea it was going to blow up, and so on. I corrected any false information in the description. All right? Now, so on and so forth. And so quite frankly, this world is a power game. And so ultimately, if you are allowing yourself to be manipulated as a pawn in purity, because you're expecting people to be pure, you will continue to be manipulated as a pawn. If you demand to be a king, you must show in strength that you can be a king, and so on. Anyway, now, and so on and so forth. So the truth as to how this world works is actually very dark. It's a bunch of manipulation, a bunch of evil, a bunch of plotting against each other, a bunch of jealousy, a bunch of Schadenfreude, and so on. And so I can read all the minds. All right, one of Thanos' capabilities is mild telepathy. Quite frankly, I'm going to now posit it with the scientific method, as has been thought by many people, that there is actually a connection between quantum mechanics and mild telepathy, and potentially some aspect of quantum biology and mental electronics could lead to some form of mild telepathy. I have perceived on certain occasions that there must be a connection between quantum mechanics and mild telepathy. And so there's certain times I see signs, and I know that sign is directly related to me reading the mind of someone or something else or some other entity. All right? Anyway, and so the universe talks to me in quantum mechanics. I don't think I'm going nuts here. I think there's some odd connection here that I'm just beginning to grasp. Anyway, so on. And so quickly, all right, what is the truth for me? I'm a light skin. I'm a brown male. I'm mixed with black and white. Some onlookers would be like, you're just a white guy with a tan, right? But I'm not. I'm a light skin, all right? And so the hair on top of my head is curly. My beard is somewhat curly. The width of my nose is thick. The width of my lips is thick, all right? And so basically, those features come from my black genetics. And so I'm a light skin, I'm mixed, all right? Now the stereotype is that, oh, the black males are more endowed, aren't they, right? This is simply a foolish stereotype. That stereotype and narrative is actually promoted by the male pornographic industry, all right? Statistically, the black males will only be slightly more on average than the whites, right? This is because the theory is that in sub-Saharan Africa, with sort of higher temperatures and greater sort of pathogen exposure and mortality, it favors sort of a fast strategy leading to selection for high fertility in the females and high testosterone in the males. And so hence, over time, iterations of that fast selection strategy led to females with larger back size and breasts, as per African women, and African males who are slightly more endowed. Now, in the more temperate regions, apparently the strategy was slower, and he was selecting for larger brains and not necessarily, size of sexual attributes such as correlated with testosterone and fertility. And so the white woman will typically, on average, have smaller back sides and breasts than the African woman. They will not have as high fertility, and so on and so forth. Now, I can read all the minds of all you clowns, and so they're clowns that are saying, I'm three, I'm a liar, I'm naive, all right? But I'm none of those things. I'm just actually goddamn pure, and all of you, I can read all your minds, and so on. Anyway, now, so on and so forth. And so basically, the black males will be on average slightly more than the whites, but by irony, in this universe, or on this planet Earth, the world record holder for male penis size is not even a black male. He's a white British male. He goes by the name of Matt Barr, all right, Matt Barr, okay? And so ultimately, he's white, he's British, he's not very tall, but he has the medically verified largest penis on the planet Earth in terms of bone-pressed erect size, all right? Larger than any popular black porn star, so on and so forth, all right? And so ultimately as well, with males, you have shower humans and you have grower humans. I belong to grower human category, all right? And so let's say I'm healthy and I'm hydrated and it's warm. My flaccid hanging size will be roughly 5.5 inches. Let's say it's freezing. My flaccid hanging size could constrict to less than 5 inches if it's freezing, all right? Let's say I'm healthy, I'm fit, and I'm maximally aroused. There are two real metrics for maximally aroused penis size measurement, all right, in terms of length. There is the non-bone pressed erect length. Then there is the bone pressed erect length, all right? The metric that is used for penis size throughout is bone pressed erect length, okay? And so basically, you get the following. Not bone pressed. It's just going to measure from where the dick is attaching to the body to the head. Bone press, you're going to press to the bone, including compression of the fat pad, which usually adds a half an inch to measurement, or to the length. And so bone pressed is a more realistic measurement of complete insertable length, because during maximal insertion, there is compression of the male fat pad. Okay? And so for myself, when I'm 100%, all right, I will have a peak, not bone pressed erect length of at least 8 inches, sometimes even over 8 inches, without even being bone pressed, all right? I have a fat pad that is about a half an inch, right? And so basically then my bone pressed with compression of fat pad ends up being at least 8.5 with humility at peak. All right. And so I'll say it again. My not bone pressed at peak is going to be at least 8, sometimes even over 8, without even sort of pressing to the bone. Therefore, my bone pressed peak with humility ends up being at least 8.5, or in other words, 8.5 or greater when actually bone pressed. Okay? So you're getting the logic. All right? Then there's girth. And so shaft girth circumference, I'm maybe slightly over 6 inches around. Then my glans or head of penis is thicker, is maybe 7 inches around. All right? I am barefoot, maybe 6'3.5". No exaggeration. All right? Julio or the Break, his profiles would say he was 6 feet tall, right? But then actually, people have said he's not that much taller than his female co-stars, so he's more like actually 5'10". All right? Barefoot, more without exaggeration. All right? Now, Julio, a good way to find the real unexaggerated BPELs of male porn stars is to ask Grok to analyze the entire internet, which does frame analysis of porn stars' sizes, right? And so Grok is then going to analyze all the threads where people are doing frame estimation of the actor's true peak bone press size. And so if you ask Grok for Break, all right, Grok is going to say he's 9.5 BPEL, roughly, all right? That's actually true. So expand out a tape measure to 9.5 inches. You might be like, oh, I thought Julio was 11 or 14. No, his bone pressed is maybe 9.5. Open out a tape measure to 9.5, hold it up to your face. That is Julio, all right? And so I said, I'm at least 8.5, all right? Julio is 9.5, all right? Now here's the following, all right? People have noticed that Julio appears to have a pelvic attachment, right? Where his dick attaches to his body. In other words, for over 1 inch, there appears to be some sort of odd pelvic detachment. It's not known whether that's intentional ligament cut from a suspensory ligament release surgery or from having sickle cell anemia and episodes of priapism causing actually sort of a compromised suspensory ligament leading to a naturally occurring pelvic detachment. All right. But in other words, over 1 inch where his dick is attached to his body seems to be a pelvic detachment to enhance length. And so sometimes when he's performing insertion, you can see that sort of odd pelvic detachment compressing. All right. All right. But Julio is more than me. I'm not making a case that I'm equal to Julio. I'm slightly less than Julio, but Julio's peak includes what people view as some kind of pelvic detachment or ligament cut or odd thing at point of connection to body. Anyway, now Julio's sickle cell anemia would actually lead to episodes of priapism, right? Causing swollen tissue, right? Swollen tissue. And so basically, there's also the shaft girth circumference estimate for Julio. And so when Julio was not enhanced with pumping, the girth circumference around shaft estimate for him was 6.5 to 6.75. All right. My shaft girth circumference is only slightly over 6 inches. In other words, I have a thinner shaft than Julio. Julio was pretty much the thickest performer because, again, his sickle cell anemia and episodes of priapism led to that swollen tissue. All right. And then his girth would ironically taper off at his glans or head of penis. His glans would be sort of thinner than shaft, whereas in my case, my shaft girth is thinner than Julio, but then my head girth is like as thick as Julio's shaft. All right. So anyway, all right. And so on and so forth. Now, not all black males will be thick. There exists Hollywood Cash, who is actually extremely thin. You can inspect his pornographic scenes. And actually, I am larger than Hollywood Cash, even though Hollywood Cash is a green-lighted porn star with Blacked.com. All right? Anyway. And then Matt Barr, who's a white British male, is even larger than Break or Julio. All right? Now, you're also going to have the height illusion, the sort of tall male illusion. My barefoot height, in other words, no shoes, is 6'3.5". All right? Break was maybe 5'10" without shoes. And so you give like a 9.5 BPL with a pelvic detachment included in that 9.5. All right, from certain angles, he could look like he's hanging to his knees. My legs are way longer than him. All right, and so basically, in my first few experiences in sex, I realized that my flaw was that I was being pure in my naivety, expecting the world to be pure. All right, but people, and the nature of people, is that they will just quickly gather evidence and put you in a box and just say, no, you're 0, no, put you in a box, gather evidence, right? So the first time I had intercourse, I had no idea what I was doing. I didn't know how to maintain my peak size. I didn't know about all this other stuff. First time I had sex, it was not that good, all right? Second time I had sex, the woman said that she reached orgasm around 4 times and her legs were shaking, twice on the floor, twice on the couch. And she was bouncing on me, excited and screaming and looking at me with wide eyes and having a leg shaking orgasm and so on. 4 orgasms, if she was telling me the truth. All right. But ultimately, yet another time now, she starts bleeding due to some kind of tear. And ultimately, the following is true. Female vagina depth is going to vary. For some women, when they're actually maximally aroused or horny, their depth of vagina, or where their cervix is, may be only 6 inches deep inside the vagina. However, for other types of women, they could be 7 inches deep. Some of them could be 8 inches deep. Even for a taller woman who is 5'9" or 5'10", their depth of vagina, or where the cervix is maximally going to be only 8 inches deep inside the vagina. My maximum bone press direct length is at least 8.5, and so hence that bone press direct length is all insertable when the fat pad compresses during insertion. And so basically, this female starts bleeding, and she says she's not bleeding due to period or because she's losing her virginity, right? And so I pull out, there's blood on the head of my dick, all right, and so on, whatever. And then also one time I pull out and a blob of blood plops on the floor, and she looks at it and says that I should clean that up, right? And so basically, now you're going to get the following. Right? When you have an 8.5 BPEL, and that's all inserted, that's going to hit cervix. And so I conjecture that why she started bleeding is because, again, 8.5 BPEL at least, all right? Over 6 girth at shafts, maybe 7 girth around head or glands, all right? That causes some kind of tear. She said that as she gets deeper, her vagina tends to get tighter. And so she was sexually experienced, 11 years older than me, and she started bleeding due to my size. She is not losing her virginity, and she said she was not in a period. All right? And so that's what my size did, which is maybe at least 8.5 BPEL in terms of maximum insertable length, maybe, again, 6 girth around shaft, maybe 7 girth around head. I'm saying with honesty that I touch at least an 8.5 BPEL at peak, all right, to be completely honest. All right, all this is true. All right, and so on and so forth. Now, in my first experiences in intercourse, right, I had the following, sort of naivety. All right, maintaining your peak size is contingent on infinite variables. And so basically, here are some of the variables: leg strength, core strength, pelvic floor strength, cardiovascular health, arousal level, all right, temperature level, okay, and just general health, all right, and so on, right? And so if you have strong legs, strong core, exertion during sex isn't going to alter or lead to any reduction from your peak size. If you have a strong pelvic floor, all right, when you're standing up, you need good blood trappage to engorge to your peak size when you're standing up. Strong pelvic floor, you won't reduce from your peak size when you're standing up. Strong legs and core as well help with that. All right. Strong cardiovascular health, your body manages blood flow, and so when you're exerting yourself during intercourse, you're not having any reduction from your peak size. All right, and so all that sort of is all part of the puzzle. Leg strength, core strength, pelvic floor strength, cardiovascular health. All right, then you can maintain your peak size throughout practical sex when the male has to either stand up or exert himself or do a bunch of things. All right, then there's the temperature. You need to be relatively warm and warmed up to not have any sort of constriction due to homeostasis from your real peak size. All right. Now, anyway, and so on and so forth. Now, and so on and so forth. And so the first few times I had intercourse, it was okay. All right, but then now we're gonna get into some other information. All right, I got super fit. I increased cardiovascular exercise frequency, maybe jogging 3 times a week, pick up soccer sometimes. Then I decided I would practice as if I were a male porn star and do a standing photo shoot. And so the result was a standing picture in which basically I am standing up and turned to the side, and then I am roughly at my peak size. Okay? Now I'm 6'3.5" barefoot, and my peak bone press direct length is at least 8.5. The entirety of the bone press direct length is insertable. All right? So on. Now, so on and so forth. And so basically, with that picture, I then got a frame of Drake or Julio from one of his scenes when he is maximally erect and kneeling and performing insertion. He's 5'10", I'm 6'3.5". These are barefoot heights. All right? And so basically, what I did is that I scaled the head size of Drake and the head size of myself. I sort of scaled the distance from the back of my neck to my nose and made it the same as his distance from back of neck to nose. I scaled the width of the thighs, where the width of the thighs as a scaling reference. And so you get that by the width of our thighs and by the size of our heads, distance from back of neck to nose, we are roughly to scale. He's shorter than me, and so visibly I have a slightly longer torso than him, and this is actually roughly to scale to the best of my effort. Interestingly, all right, again, his 9.5 BPL peak is with that odd pelvic detachment. When he's performing insertion, you can see that detachment maybe slightly compress, all right? Whereas my BPL peak is at least 8.5, all right? Which is without pelvic detachment, all right? And so basically, ironically, in that scaled image, in terms of length, we look to be nearly the same length. In terms of girth of shaft, I will obviously be slightly thinner than him because Drake was the thickest performer, all right? But I'm thicker than Hollywood Cash, right? And then Drake's girth would taper off, and his glands or head would be smaller than his shaft, whereas my girth actually expands, and my glands or head is thicker than my shaft. Anyway, and so in that real scaled picture, where I'm slightly taller, we look to be comparable. In fact, I look to be really slightly thinner in terms of shaft. And that's it. Now, anyway, and so all this happened. Now, fate loves irony, right? And so the universe is a machine that propagates irony. It allows men to rise and fall over time, all right? And so nothing really benevolent allows some person's life to consist of good experiences and some other person's life to be horrible, all right? So if you are to be strong in this world, you must know that if you are in a time of weakness, people will try and exploit that weakness. And so basically what happens is that after I figure out how to maintain my peak size, all right, I have strong legs, strong core, strong cardio, strong pelvic floor. All right, Kegels are exercises a male can do to improve pelvic floor. It sort of may make your erection stronger, especially when standing, in which that pelvic floor is going to help trap blood to keep your peak size when standing. All right. And I went from being really confident in having even the standing picture where I look to be even comparable to Drake to then falling very ill with actually a flu-like virus that gives me a very high fever. So I'm bedridden for days straight with a high fever and headache. All right. And so the high fever actually kills my body's hydration level. Your body and your dick is mainly water. And then ultimately the fever also kills my sperm count. And so when your sperm count is dead, you pretty much have erectile dysfunction. When you're dehydrated, you have erectile dysfunction. And in general, the virus was such that I was low energy and pretty weak, and so on, and so on. So when a male body is fighting a high fever and a virus, they're in survival mode, and a male human will have erectile dysfunction and be weak and dehydrated when sick with a high fever and virus. And so basically, I went from being confident in having a standing picture where I look to be comparable to Drake, confident and figured out how to maintain my peak size during sex to be satisfying, right? To then very sick with a high fever and virus, right? And then basically I'm on a tight schedule, female's on a tight schedule. And so I want to see this woman. And so basically my brain did constraint satisfaction and said, if I'm to see this woman in the window of opportunity in which I can see her, it seems like I will be sick. And so sillily, in my naivety, I agreed to see her and rendezvous with her when I am sick. All right. And my body fighting that high fever and virus, all right, instead of being potent like in the standing picture I took when healthy before falling ill, all right, I was in large part weak, limp, dehydrated, kills sperm count, low energy, low libido, sick with a fever and virus. All right. And instead of being at my peak size, I was actually often like 6 inches or less and completely a dead battery and very, very low energy during the intercourse. All right. Now, the universe is very evil. People are very evil. And so genuinely, right, that experience, right, people, men who are competitive, women who are evil and want to exploit men, all right, will use that experience as like evidence to say I'm a zero and be happy and say, no, he's normal, he's a zero. All right, then the competitive men will say, no, he's normal, he's a zero, whatever. And then the woman will say, oh, he's a bitch. He's my bitch, or whatever. This, that, and the other. All right. But in Christian marriage tradition, you're going to say the following: you are committing to your partner in times of sickness and in health. In times of sickness and in health. And so ultimately, in times of health, my sizes made this woman bleed due to some kind of tear. All right. And then there was a time in which she said that her orgasm count was 4 and that her legs were shaking. And she was bouncing on me excited in a cowgirl position and then stopped and had a leg shaking orgasm. And then now, there is, then now, in times of health, there was multiple orgasms and then a tear. In times of sickness, all right, I'm weak. And then it's ED me because I'm sick. And then it's not as good, right? And so basically, I went from, okay, I figured out how to maintain my peak size to be like good at sex, and I have standing pictures to prove it, to now I have ED because I'm very sick. And so fate just continues to propagate irony. The simulation just allows, people to elevate it, some people to fall. It's all just an ironic story. Anyway, now the other thing you need to be good at sex is the ability to last long without sort of being overly sensitive and like not having premature ejaculation. And so if you are sexually inexperienced or you're not having frequent sex, you could actually end up basically having premature ejaculation because you are overly sensitive. And so the best male porn stars are actually able to stay at their peak size without premature ejaculation. And sort of stay at their peak size, go full throttle, no premature ejaculation. That sort of sensitivity and ejaculation control comes from frequent sex, years of sexual experience, and the ability to like regulate oneself and so on. All right? Now, so on and so forth. Anyway, and so I'm slightly less than break, as per the standing picture that's scaled to him properly. I'm more than Hollywood Cash. And then Matt Barr is a white British guy that is actually bigger than break, bigger than any black guy. He's a world record holder. All right? And so basically, although on average the blacks will be slightly more endowed because of those selection pressures in sub-Saharan Africa for high testosterone, high fertility men and women, all right? You're going to have the following, which is that basically genetics, and then further genetics, and then basically, what now? Hold on. Genetics, and then sort of hormonal or testosterone exposure during fetal development. Those things can lead to sort of male humans that are white, that are actually extremely endowed, even though white. So you can look up a picture of Matt Barr, and so he's actually extremely endowed. He's not that tall, and so on and so forth. Anyway, yeah, so on and so forth. So anyway, yeah. So anyway, and so evolutionarily, I think love needs to come back, and you need to find like who you meant for. So some women's vaginas are going to be smaller, and so maybe they're going to expand to 6 inches deep where cervix is typically when aroused. Some women could be larger, taller women. Their vagina could expand to 8 inches deep where cervix is naturally at maximal arousal. All right, and so there's pretty much like even for taller women, 5'9", 5'10" women, their cervix will not be more than 8 inches deep. And so myself at having a peak BPEL of 8.5, which is all insertable length, is going to hit the cervix of pretty much all women, and then so on and so forth. But ultimately, this thing is just all ironic, and so I don't believe in any benevolent force allowing things to be the way they are. right? And so there's a 3-inch one erect micropenises. If I was a 3-inch one erect micropenis, I would decide sex is not for me. I should devote myself to intellectual things, and so on and so forth. Now, Nikola Tesla was not a very sexually active person. He accumulated over 300 patents in his life, but he was poor throughout his life, exploited, and died poor and alone in a hotel. All right, even though like 300 of his patents are all laid the foundation for modern electronics and technology, and he was one of the most brilliant creative minds that existed, he used the power of sexual transmutation to convert sort of energy devoted to women and to sex to purely intellectual and creative efforts, which is a superpower of men who have extreme self-control to perform that transmutation. And so throughout undergraduate college, I didn't have any sex at all. I got a bunch of A's. I even got into a very competitive grad school in electrical engineering. My name's even on a quantum computing paper that happened as a result of my idea of saying that we should use sort of the 2-photon lithography 3D printing technique with like a sort of femtosecond laser in one laboratory to 3D print ion traps for the trapped ion quantum computing laboratory, which was using magnetic confinement to make a trapped ion quantum computer with lasers to drive transitions in the qubit or quantum bit, which is an ion. All right, and so I was a freshman working in these two laboratories at the same time. All right, around a bunch of graduate students, and I said we should 3D print the ion traps. The two labs started working together. 2 years later, the PhD researchers and postdoc and principal investigators had written a paper, all right, manifesting my idea, all right, and the actual paper was written by more senior researchers, right? But then my name is in the acknowledgements as the guy who had the idea for the whole thing in the first place, all right, because that's how it happened. And so I was, not smart enough to actually work on it and manifest it, but I had the idea in the first place for the collaboration. Anyway, so on and so forth. Now, anyway, so on and so forth. So on and so forth. Now we could talk about sort of the illusion of height. And so Anton Hardin is actually about 5'7". You ask Grok for his sort of actual BPL estimate in the community's analysis. It actually ends up saying about 8.5 for him. And so basically being 5'7" and skinny, having an 8.5 BPEL really ends up looking quite large for being 5'7" with short legs and being relatively skinny. And then many women he's paired with for his scenes ends up being like 5'3". Kylie Rocket is actually only 5'3". And so when you're 5'7" and have very short legs, 8.5 bone pressed can look very large. Then you put a tiny 5'3" woman with him, it could look large. All right, so on and so forth. All right, and so Anton is 5'7" and 8.5 bone pressed. I am 6'3.5" and also 8.5 bone pressed, at least. Now, height does not correlate with size, and so basically Jason Love is also like a porn star, and he's like maybe 6'4" or something like that. I don't know about barefoot, and quite muscular, right? Now, the estimate for the bone press of Jason Love often ends up being maybe 7.5, something like that, between 7.5 and 8. All right, even though he's 6'4". And so Jason Love is the archetype in which he is short, but he is thick. He appears to have natural girth. Then Hollywood Cash is, I believe, slightly longer than Jason Love, but thin like a wire, right? So you have all these different archetypes of porn stars that exist, right? I'm endowed enough to be a porn star, all right? And so the male porn stars get paid to make pornographic videos, whereas any other normal guy who's not that endowed, may have to work some other typical job in the economy, and then sort of have a woman be interested in him in part because of his financial situation or his wealth, all right? But ultimately, the universe is very ironic and dark in that anything that could be thought of as a blessing also has a curse attribute. It has an attribute that makes that very thing also a curse, and so on and so forth. And so if you're a porn star, your image is associated with something very base and profane, which is sort of visual explicit, sexual information, nudity of yourself associated like on the internet for anyone to see, all right, and rather than being somewhat fellow of the Royal Society or something to that effect. Anyway, so on and so forth. Now, fellow of the Royal Society. Anyway, And so the irony and the machine allows men to rise and fall. And so apparently, with the case of Julio Gomez or Drake, after his high, where he would get paid by Black.com, a lot of views on his content, maybe making $350 an hour at times. That's right, $350 an hour at times potentially. After all that high, he was kind of an asshole. So he'd post on X saying, "Oh, white guys cannot compete. Here's a white micropenis. Here's my dick." And so he could select for evidence to sort of show a white micropenis. But instead, he could have actually selected for Matt Barr. And so if he got a picture of Matt Barr and compared it to himself, Matt Barr would actually be even bigger than him. And again, Matt Barr is a white British guy that is the world record holder and is even bigger than Drake or Julio. And so basically what happened now is that he committed a bunch of crimes. The final crime that he committed was a choking and assault crime where he follows this woman into an elevator and starts choking her and assaulting her and groping her. And then that leads to him getting incarcerated. And I believe the incarceration sentence was like 15 years to life, where basically after this sort of assaulting, choking crime, he got like a 15-year jail sentence, and so he's incarcerated now, right? And so after his high, then he has an extended period of just being incarcerated with no sex in jail, this, that, and the other, right? So ultimately, the irony machine is, kind of just continues to propagate, right? He has this high. A lot of people would be like jealous of his high, but then, he's incarcerated for like 15 years, right? Because of being an asshole and assaulting and choking a woman, among other things he did in the past, and so on, if this is all correct. So on and so forth. I do have an OnlyFans profile. There are at least 4 real female fans on my profile. There is a real picture of myself standing at nearly my peak size, scaled to Julio performing insertion. And so I look to be comparable to him, only slightly thinner, but pretty much everyone is thinner than Julio, and so on. And then again, Julio's peak bone press is like 9.5, including a pelvic detachment. The detachment often compresses visibly during insertion, with maybe 6.5, 6.75 shaft girth, due to a sickle cell anemia causing priapism leading to swollen tissue, with then smaller glands or head of penis than shaft. Myself is at least an 8.5 bone press at peak. Again, at least an 8.5 bone press at peak, with slightly over 6 inches girth around shaft, maybe 7 girth around head or glands. All right. And so in terms of total volume of dick, I'm slightly less than him. All right. But then my girth around glands or head may make up for my shaft not being ultra thick. Anyway, so on and so forth. And so in terms of girth, there's also ways it can be distributed. It can be distributed in width, or it can be distributed in height, right? And so basically you can have a guy that is wide but not tall in terms of girth. And so I think my girth distribution is at times nearly circular, but at times it could be slightly more oval, in that I could be at times slightly wider in girth than I am tall. And so in the standing picture, in which it's scaled to Julio, in terms of the height dimension of the girth, he looks to be a little bit taller in terms of, again, the height dimension of girth. But in other pictures, scaled from the top, I've seen that in width of girth, the width of Julio and I appears to be similar, about the same, but he does have a bit more height than me, so on. And Hollywood Cash is even thinner than me, so on and so forth. So on and so forth. Julio with a 9.5 bone press, with a pelvic detachment included in that 9.5, would get exaggerated to 14 inches. And so in jest, said my dick size was 10 inches, because pretty much everything and every statistic is exaggerated. Men exaggerate their height, which is their height only when they're wearing shoes instead of barefoot. Men exaggerate their dick size. The porn industry exaggerates their dick size. And so me saying I have a 10-inch dick is because of my knowledge that everything is exaggerated, and the pornographic industry also exaggerates size nuttily, right? And so my dick is not 10 inches. My maximum bone pressed erect length at peak is realistically at least 8.5, all right? And so again, you have not bone pressed, then you have bone pressed. So not bone pressed is where dick is attached to body to head. Bone press, you can press the fat pad and go to the bone, all right? Usually adds about half an inch. So the fat pad compression usually adds about half an inch. Then you get to the actual bone, all right? So not bone pressed, I'm at least approximately 8 inches, or at times even slightly over 8 inches without even being bone pressed, all right? Then you bone press me, I end up being at least 8.5. All right, I'm gonna say that one more time. Not bone pressed, I'm slightly over 8 inches, all right? And then at least, all right? Bone press me, I'm at least 8.5. At times, my bone press could even approach 9. But I'm being meticulous here to state this accurately. Not bone pressed, I am approximately 8 inches, or at times even slightly over 8 inches. Bone press me, I am at least 8.5, or even at times approaching 9 or nearly 9. All right? And so my bone pressed peak is going to lie somewhere between 8.5 and 9. All right? My not bone pressed is going to be between 8 and 8.5. All right? So without even bone pressing me, I'll be over 8. Bone press me, I'll be 8.5 or more. The bone press is the metric of insertable length because during maximal insertion, during sexual intercourse, the male fat pad compresses to the bone. And so the full bone press is actually insertable length during sex, and so on and so forth. Anyway, so yeah, people should find evolutionarily who they're meant for, and so on and so forth. But anyway, and so some vaginas are going to be like 6 inches deep where their cervix is. Some are going to be 8 inches deep. My size is a good fit for a vagina that's maybe 8 inches deep where cervix is. All right, and so on. And so find who you're evolutionarily meant for. Dick size is going to vary. Female vagina size is going to vary. And so basically you're going to have guys that are too big, too small, and just right. And so I hope to find a female that is just right for me, and so on. Anyway, and so all this thing is very rotten. And so basically, people would like to say that I'm a zero. JC is a zero, he has ED. But I had horrible ED in recent times because I was extremely sick with a high fever and a virus. All right, in Christian marriage, you're going to marry in sickness and in health. All right, so on and so forth. Anyway, so this has been my consciousness tonight. There's a real picture in it where myself and Break look comparable, and so on. I've learned how to maintain my peak size. I'm healthy now, and I've also learned how to figure out sensitivity control, premature ejaculation control. Funnily enough, there are pills called Hims Last Longer, right? May help with lasting longer, but any pill often has a side effect. So it may be superior to just try and gain more sexual experience and gain a natural level of control in that respect in terms of sensitivity or premature ejaculation. And then Kegels will strengthen pelvic floor and enable you to have stronger erections when standing up, along with leg and core strength helps with that as well. So does cardiovascular health. If you're doing 3 times a week of 45-minute cardio or jogging or soccer, your energy levels will be high. You'll be able to maintain your peak size when you're standing, this, that, and the other. All right? Anyway, so on and so forth. All right. I will make love come back. So on. Anyway, so yeah. A lot needs to change. For all you people who are jealous of people, I'm not jealous of anyone because I understand the following. Everything that is perceived as a blessing or something that you could be jealous of comes with a curse to it. or something about that very thing that also makes it a curse. All right, you want to be famous. Well, the fame and attention from all that consciousness will lead to you having, potentially, you're not able to have a private life. The attention that you get could be stressful and overwhelming, and so on. Right? You wish you were tall. Well, if you're tall, you will not as easily have the sort of explosive agility and dribbling ability of Lionel Messi, who's only 5'7", right? All right. Zlatan Ibrahimovic, who is maybe 6'4", 6'5", barefoot. I don't know about barefoot heights, right? I am at least 6'3.5" barefoot, and so Zlatan Ibrahimovic, I don't know about his barefoot height, but barefoot he could be like 6'4" or something. I'm not sure, right? And so even though Zlatan was around my height, he could kind of dribble extremely well, especially in his youth. And so there are clips of Zlatan Ibrahimovic in his youth, even though he's tall, dribbling pretty well, beating multiple players at a time sometimes. But ultimately, at his height, Zlatan will never be as explosive or good of a dribbler as Lionel Messi, who's only 5'7". When your center of gravity is lower, all right, you're able to change direction better. Your acceleration is more explosive often, all right? And so there's taller guys, right? Often a tall guy will have bad acceleration, but maybe good peak sprint speed. And so Usain Bolt, the world's fastest man from Jamaica, I'm also from Jamaica, right? Usain Bolt is stated to be 6'5". I don't know if that is barefoot or with shoes, all right? And so if you look at Usain Bolt races, all right, he basically sort of, when he starts out, his acceleration is not the best. And so some shorter guys may have a better start. But when he reaches his peak sprint speed with his very long legs, all right, then he just completely sort of explodes away from the competition. All right, not that good acceleration. Not as good acceleration as a shorter guy, but a peak sprint speed that completely dominates. All right? All right. So there you have it. Fate loves irony, envy is the occupation of the unwise. I will make love come back. All right. Thank you for your attention. All right. So Deus Ex Machina out.